Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Harkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Technology Planning for the Universal Traveler. The last webinar on the intersection of business continuity, awareness, and risk management is up. You can find it at my.infotex.com/intersection. And so I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, the awareness guru from Indiana, the man with 13 letters after his name. We call him the Sheriff of the North, the breaker of tech, the bringer of policy, Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. I definitely like the breaker of tech name that you have for me there. I'd like to do a shout out this time to the IBA, and the main reason why is because I have just got the information to them that they need in order to put up their registration page for the vendor management workshop that's coming up on December 7th. And I just wanted to, briefly say that, from a technology planning perspective, vendor management takes up a large majority of the available time we have for our compliance burden. And so I'm really focusing this next workshop on what are the bare bones minimum. If we need to get through a vendor due diligence process in a minimal amount of time, what are the shortcuts that are allowed? What are the shortcuts that our auditors, us auditors would frown upon? The impact of new guidance. And then, of course, we'll, go over once again how to review a SOC 1 or 2. And then a lot of my clients are asking about outsourcing the vendor management process. I've seen it work. I've seen it not work so well. And so we'll be talking about outsourcing different components of your vendor management process. Before we start on today's subject, Mike, I was very curious to know how we did on the survey that we had people take on the way in.
Yes, we had 75% said have no plan, and 25% said have an annual plan. And that was the conclusion of the results.
All right. Well, good. Then those of you who have no plan, we'll be talking about a process that you can go through to quickly bring a plan up to par that your auditors will appreciate. And those of you who have no plan, you really are working off of a plan right now. It's just discombobulated. It's not really organized. It's not making you more productive. In fact, it's because you don't have a written plan, you are probably a lot less productive than you could be if you had a good technology plan, or at least that's the case I'm going to be trying to make today. I'm an IT auditor. I'm certainly not a technology planner, but I have been thinking about technology planning and what it takes to create a good, solid technology plan since the mid-1980s when a company I ran in a previous life decided we wanted to get out in front of our competition when it came to our use of technology. We actually wrote our own, what would be a bank's core processor, which was not the best way to approach that, by the way. But when you're designing software, you end up spending a lot of time in change management, and you spend a lot of time in technology planning. And so I'd like to kind of have us, this is about the 20th time I've given a talk about technology planning. And so I would like to have us kind of take a paradigm shift and maybe look at technology planning in a little bit different light. Really going back to my college years, my freshman year, I actually found this book, The Universal Traveler. Jim Bagnall was a professor at the college I went to, and in our creative problem-solving class, he had each of us look through this book, and I didn't realize it at the time, but the book was designed to catch the attention of those of us who are really into the Lord of the Rings and fantasy novels and that sort of thing. But it did spell out a very flexible process for getting through a design process, for solving a problem, for creating a plan. And what the Universal Traveler really proposed was that, we should see all of life as a design, And then we should see design as a journey, and then we also should recognize that design is really a problem-solving, goals-oriented process. And so I'm, today wanting to introduce to you the fact that we could take a universal traveler approach to technology planning. We can look at the technology planning process as a design process that is really, when it comes to design, of a selection and a prioritizing process than anything else. And so I'm wanting to present to you at the end of this webinar a 7-step journey that you can take to create a technology plan from scratch, or for the 25% of you who actually have an annual plan, to maybe improve the process you use to keep that plan up to speed, up to date, and a productive tool, a valuable tool. I've always seen technology planning as an IT governance process, and so if you're not familiar with the Infotex approach to the FFIEC guidance, we've mapped the guidance to 8 different sub-processes that go together to help us govern the way we use technology. That's kind of a philosophy we've maintained since we started our company in 2000. It's worked pretty well, and technology planning really, it really bridges many of these different processes. I mean, vendor management is something that drives our technology planning process. Business continuity drives the process. But, I find that the technology plan is really where we take governance and really we take security and make it about governance. And the reason why is because the technology plan is the #1 tool that we can use to make sure that IT is aligned with the business strategy of the bank. That's really what turns information security into IT governance. It's what I've maintained for years, and when you look at the management booklet that was released last year, which, by the way, started talking about IT governance instead of information security, if we was to simplify it, what we're really saying is that IT governance is security plus alignment with the business strategy. And so the technology plan is the tool that we can use to help us facilitate the tactics that are articulated in the organization's business plan, which of course requires the organization to have a business plan. And as an auditor, I've run into many times management's response to, do you have a technology plan? Yes, we've kind of developed a set of bullet points as to what we want to achieve in the next year. And the next question is, well, is that aligned with your business plan? And the answer is, well, the bank doesn't really have a business plan. And so, the first thing I would do is lobby for a business plan so that you can base your technology plan on what the overall strategy of the business currently is. And more importantly, what are the tactics that we want to implement in this next year so that we can use technology to facilitate those tactics. Strategy alignment, of course, is also about getting a return on the investment that we place in our technology, and those of us who've been around long enough to go through at least 1 or 2 technology plans realize that the intangible returns are often more what we talk about than any kind of tangible return. And yes, I agree, check 1 is kind of an old bullet point there, or check 21, I should say, is a rather old bullet point. I think that Infotex should put in our technology plan the tactic of updating our slide deck about technology planning. But the management team plays an important role in the whole technology planning process, because it's really our management team that should be determining the technologies that facilitate their business tactics once they learn those technologies. And of course, they're going to conferences and webinars and different types of educational events to help them learn how technology can make their business function more competitive or more productive or more simplified, less frustrating, whatever we want to say. And so it's the management team that determines the appropriate time to develop and deploy new technologies. And therefore, the management team, it's very important that they're involved in the technology planning process, because what technology planning is often mainly about at least from a bottom-up perspective, is when are we going to deploy these new technologies that we're seeing our competitors and then, of course, the rest of the world deploying before we as a little bank in the middle of, Indiana or Ohio or Kentucky are getting to deploying. And so, of course, if you've been to any of my, workshops about technology, strategy alignment, you'll know that I'm a big believer in Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations theory. It's something that he wrote way back in 1962. It was, speaking of the Universal Traveler and the types of classes that we took, in the 70s. This was definitely a book that was being taught to those of us who were interested in creative problem solving and technology in general. And it's, we're using language that came out of this book. Here we are, 40 years later, 45 years later, and we're still, using the principles that Everett Rogers taught, which basically is that as time goes on, the price and problems associated with the technology come down, and the features and sophistication related to the technology increases. I know you're all sitting there saying, okay, well, that goes without saying, but what we want to do is we want to talk to our management team in terms of what is our adoption philosophy? Do we want to be early majority adopters, or do we want to be like most community-based banks who are late majority, possibly even laggards when it comes to the adoption of new technologies? And in longer webinars about the subject, we break that down. Banks are usually early adopters of security technology and laggards of any kind of technology that decreases our security, right? But we can predict when a technology is going to cross into a certain type of adoption strategy. And so if we decide that we want to be early majority adopters of security technologies, we can predict when that security technology is going to come into the early majority phase of adoption, because as Everett Rogers has proposed in 1962, what we've noticed over time is that technology adoption does actually follow a bell curve. And so we can basically say that, hey, by the time 50% of the market has adopted a technology, that's when we're crossing into the late majority. That's when we should start adding that technology into our technology plan. It is the theory. Of course, you have to, do a lot of Googling to find out what, market share a particular technology has, and for the most part, we're not really implementing this theory numerically. But at the end of the day, every bank is working off of this theory, whether they know it or not, whether they've documented that they're working off this theory or not. And that's because IT governance is a process. That's because there is no such thing when IT governance is a process, when technology planning is a process, as having a perfect plan. The 75% of you who don't have a plan right now, you really are working off of a plan that's not documented, and it wouldn't be that hard for you to write a plan as long as you realize that it doesn't have to be 100%. It doesn't have to be perfect. A technology plan is something that we never follow 100%. That's one of the things I hear a lot when I'm auditing a bank is, well, why don't you have a plan? Well, because we never follow it anyway. Well, if you have a plan, you will at least be aware of what you're not following, okay, if you have a written plan. And again, you're working off of a plan. It's just not a written plan. And again, I maintain it's probably not the most productive plan if it's not written. Because technology planning is a process, and the bottom line is because it's a process, we don't cross it off the list and say we're done with it. We don't file it away. There's no wishing. You never have to deal with it again.
Dan, we're running out of time here. Enough on the process stuff. Can we go ahead and move on?
Well, all right, but I was going to give $1 million away to the person who could name.
Go ahead then.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I tell you what, I'll continue with along those lines, but no $1 million.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, but just to make this go quicker. But what do you think, if attendees, as you're listening to me talk, which one of these processes do you think technology planning really falls into? Is it a risk management process? I mean, let's face it, our technology plan is really about risk management, because a lot of the work we're planning to do are responses to audit findings, examination findings, our risk assessments, new technologies bring in new risk, et cetera, et cetera. Or would you think it, maybe technology planning is an access management process or a vendor management process? I'm pretty sure most of you, at least if you've been coming to my webinars on a regular basis, already know that I'm going to make the case as to why technology planning is an awareness process. Awareness is actually both the purpose of technology planning and the deliverable from technology planning. And so in other words, the reason why we want to do a technology plan is so we can become aware of all the things that management wants technology to do in the course of the next year in order to facilitate their business tactics. And by the way, if a bank doesn't have a written business plan, they still have a business plan. It's just not written. And so we still need to try to figure out, well, okay, so you don't have a business plan, or at least a formal one, but what are we planning to do next year? Because we want to make sure that technology is aligned with those business tactics. And so, yes, I'm the purveyor of awareness. I believe that awareness is really 9/11 to the battle when it comes to information security, but I also hope that you will learn when you start doing technology planning on an annual basis, not trying to be perfect, just trying to document at the end of every year, here's what we think we're going to do next year, and then maybe check status on that a couple times. I'm obviously going to go into a much more detailed process than that, but that's really what technology is about. It's about becoming aware of what the management team is planning to do so that we can make management aware of how we're going to facilitate their tactics with our technology plan. And so the deliverable is an awareness process. Once we're done with our technology plan, and actually, by the way, I would maintain that before we're done with the technology plan, we should shop it around to our management team to make sure that they agree with it so that they can help us whittle it down. And I'm going to be talking a lot about the fact that technology planning is more about saying no than it is saying yes. And what I mean by that is that it's more about whittling out what we just can't get to than it is about trying to decide what we're going to do. And so because of that, we definitely need the management team involved. We need to make sure that we take advantage of the whole notion of awareness in all directions. The board definitely should be aware of what we're spending, why we're spending it, and the potential risks related to those expenses. How can we manage risk-reward if we don't know what the reward is? We're spending a lot of time on the risk. What's the reward? And how does technology support that business plan is something the board should understand. Meanwhile, management needs to be aware of any new resource requirements. If management says, hey, we're going to go out, we're going to have the computer reach out and scratch our customer's back, well, we want to make sure the manager understands that, well, there's got to be some kind of a tool that we connect to their computers to scratch the customer's back, right? And so we need to make sure that management understands what they're asking for, and the technology plan can help us do that. It can show the tactics related to a strategy item that the management team is wanting us to pursue. The technology team itself obviously needs to be aware of what's coming down the road. What kind of new, requirements are we going to have? What kind of new controls will we need to implement? What's the status of our projects that we, all decided we were going to commit to last year, whether or not we committed to them in writing? And then how do we prioritize all this? We have a certain, number of people that we have in our minions of troops that we're bringing to the equation. And I'm being very sarcastic, obviously, because most of the attendees are smaller community-based banks. So given the fact that we're wearing many hats and we have a limited resource in terms of time, where do we want to focus our prioritization? Technology planning, thus, is more about getting the management team to prioritize goals than it is about deciding what we're going to do. Obviously, we want to make sure the user is aware of any new procedures, any new controls, habits, disciplines that are going to come out of the use of new technologies. And then, of course, I'm hoping that we are continually taking our users to the next level when it comes to the enforcement of those controls. And that's where the audit process kind of intersects into the awareness process called technology planning, because we need to plan for not only the testing of controls, but mitigation of any kind of controls that are not passing those tests. And if we have a written technology plan, it makes it a lot easier for the frazzled IT manager in a bank to say, well, hey, that wasn't part of our plan when we started this, right? Because as it stands right now, your management team is allowed to just keep throwing ideas and goals and tactics and objectives and to-dos, and you're managing all these multiple priorities, and you don't have the ability without a plan to say, well, we didn't plan that, okay? And those few words, we didn't plan that, what are the 4 words? You know, they become very powerful words throughout the course of the year if we have a written technology plan. And in order for it to work, by the way, very similar to every other IT governance process, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to have the ISO in the corner of the conference room while the rest of the team is working on, you know, whatever they're working on, loan quality or whatever, writing up a plan that he then just takes to the board and has the board rubber stamp it. And don't get me wrong, that's what a lot of banks do. They have their IT guy write up the plan, they have the board approve it, and nobody knows what's in it, including the IT guy, because that person is so busy that 2 days after the board approved the plan, he or she has been on to other things that got thrown at him or her because the rest of the team doesn't realize what's in the plan and what's not in the plan. And so not only do we want to have that multidisciplinary approach and the written plans, but we also want to have a mechanism that requires the management team to monitor how we're doing against that plan. And really what we're talking about there is what's new. What, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're monitoring what got done, but let's face it, the IT people want to have a means of saying, well, we didn't get, you know, we got A, B, and C done, but we didn't get D, E, F, and G done because you added, you know, A, B, B, and C, C since the last time we talked about what's going to get done. So I hope I'm, you know, for why the 75% of you don't have a plan should take the time it's going to take to develop a rudimentary plan. It doesn't have to be as sophisticated as what I'm going to show you here. But if you have at least a one-page document that says this is what we're going to do, you're going to be in a much better position when it comes to managing and making sure that your time is productive and that we are truly aligning IT with the business tactics of the bank. And I've already said this once, but it's going to take a top-down and a bottom-up approach in order for us to get a really good, true, comprehensive plan. And don't get me wrong, what you present to the management team should not be a comprehensive plan. It should be the high level, this is the strategy that we're going to pursue. And by the way, I have this tactical plan if you want to read the details. But what we want the management team to understand is the strategy, and if we can get them to help us develop the strategies by identifying tactics they'd like to see us implement, we are going to be in a much better position to have a plan that actually works. Now again, 75% of you don't have a plan at all, so let's not bite off more than we can chew. You know what I mean? I would just start by writing down what are we planning to do and then go from there. But those of you who already have a plan, who are looking for sources and ideas as to what actually goes into the plan, where can I make sure that this plan doesn't fall down again next year? Because by the time we got to June, you know, everything was A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, and D, E, and F got forgotten. So how do we make sure that we get the AAs, BBs, and CCs into our plan in the first place? And that really usually is we want to make sure we're looking at all the sources of to-dos that we need to incorporate into our technology plan. Now, I'm not talking a lot about how to turn a business strategy into a technology strategy, and that's a whole other webinar. What I'm really talking about now is the journey we can go through to make sure that we have a solid technology plan at the end of this journey. But it starts, I mean, before you even start the journey, you're going to have to establish an infrastructure that enlists or really not even enlists, but it requires the cooperation of your management team, or your plan is not going to be as good as it could be. And so, of course, our highest level policy should require certain things to occur so that we end up developing a good technology plan. And so I kind of got about 6 or 7 bullet points that you should be aware of as you're starting their planning process, because the next time you have an opportunity to update that high-level policy, and if you're an FDIC bank, it could be your information security program, or if you're an OCC bank, it could be your IT governance program or your information security policy. If you're not a bank or a credit union, but at the end of the day, your highest level policy, the one that every management team member is required to read, I would require an annual update. Now, I have clients that seem to be doing a good job of technology planning, who are only doing their plan, they're only updating it every other year, or maybe even every third year or whatever, and it seems to work for them. But to me, if we want to monitor something, we need to return to it on a cyclical basis, and to me, annual makes the most sense. We're budgeting annually, we're getting audited annually, where most of the management team members are coming up with wish lists on an annual basis. They go to an annual conference, they come back with a set of annual notes that they want to talk to the IT person about. I would also make sure policy requires a multidisciplinary team, and really, we already have a bunch of multidisciplinary teams. Do we really need to create a new one? Can we assign technology planning to our steering committee, or is it something that we decide that our business continuity team is more geared up to do? And that's a choice that is individual to your organization. We obviously, especially if we're a financial institution, need to incorporate risk management into our technology plan. And your policy should require that, or else you're going to have a situation where the bank president's like, risk management, schmish management, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what we're doing new. Well, if we're doing something new, what we're actually doing is exposing the organization to new risk, and therefore your technology plan should include risk management priorities right alongside the adoption of new technology. I would also make sure, speaking of adoption, that we decide as a management team, that we decide as an IT steering committee, or whoever the team is, what is our adoption philosophy? And can we get the board to approve that? Do we want to be early adopters of technology? Do we want to be early majority, late majority, laggards? There's nothing wrong with being a laggard adopter of technology. I tell you, after what we're going through with the whole Windows 10 slam, I'm telling you, if you can wait to adopt technology, you're going to get at a much better price, and all the bugs will be worked out, right? So do we define, we want to be laggards. And then finally, we should also include our risk appetite. And the cybersecurity assessment tool, for those of you who are banks or credit unions, really kind of queued that up for you now, right? Because anything that pops into a higher level of inherent risk, you're going to inform your board about. Any area where you're not at your required level of maturity, we're going to inform the board about, right? But we want to make sure that any action items that come out of the fact that we're out of sync with our risk appetite are prioritized in the technology plan. We have a journey that the technology plan is taking us on, and we need to make sure we're aware of all the stops that we're going to take along that journey, or else we're going to miss, we're going to run out of time. We're not going to be able to stop along the way if we don't consider everything. How far out should your plan go? To me, if it's 2016, this is a slide left from last year, right? Then we should be looking at next year, the year after, and maybe, we're not sure after that, So we should be looking at 2017, 18, and 19. Now, having said that, I have a lot of clients that seem to be doing a good job of planning. They're basically saying, hey, we've got everything boiled down to this year or some other time. And so they really kind of simplify it to where this is what we're doing this year, and this is everything else. We might do it after this year, we might not, we're not worried about it. We're committing to what we're going to do this year. So, I don't know if I've said this enough yet, but we have a process that we're going to implement in 75% of the attendees today's organizations, and we have a process that we're going to take to the next level in that 25%. And so when we talk about it being a process, what we mean is that it's never going to end, okay? I'm sorry to say that, but a process is never over. It's cyclical, and it's always changing. And so what we mean by that, and what our management team needs to understand, or else we'll get bogged down with perfectionism, is that we don't have to follow our technology plan if it makes sense not to. It's always changing. It's a living and breathing document. You know, for some reason the CFO understands that budgets are a living and breathing document. Let's get the CFO to understand that if budgets can change, technology can certainly change, right? And so we need to get our management team members to understand that we're going to walk through a process here that doesn't have to be perfect, that we're going to document what we're committing to now, knowing that as time goes on, what we've committed to is going to change, and we'll update that next year or in 2 years if you're one of those banks that are doing it every other year. There's a lot of different ways that you can tackle technology planning, a lot of different processes. I kind of think this one's really cool. I haven't had the time to look in closely to see actually how it works, but you know, it seems like a pretty nice graphic there. But somebody had this out on the internet as how their technology planning process worked. Here's another technology planning process. I feel like, boy, you know, if you think Dan's is complicated, wait till you see this planning process, right? I do see, you know, this as being a good process as long as there's a, you know, a circular arrow that, hey, once we're done with the final review, we get to start all over again because it's a cyclical process. This is what the FFIEC has to say about the process you should take to do technology planning. No, really, this is what the FFIEC says about the process that you need to take in order to do technology planning. Now, having said that, they do talk about the factors that should be considered when you're putting together a technology plan. And though it might come off like I'm making fun of the FFIEC, because I do, I like making fun of the FFIEC, but very good organization, and you know what I mean, they've done a really good job of defining when they want us to take a certain approach. And so I feel like a lot should be read into the fact that this is what they've said we should do when it comes to the process of pulling together a technology plan. This is a great thing, because what it means is that we don't have to follow something like this. We can follow something like what I'm going to introduce to you today. And by the way, 7 steps is probably too many. But because the FFIEC doesn't tell us exactly how to pull together a technology plan, I would propose that we take this 7-step process. That first of all, we document where are we. I mean, if we're going to go on a journey, right? If you're going to drive from point A to point B, what's the first thing you need to know? Where point A is, right? In other words, we can't say I'm going to drive from somewhere to Chicago. How long is it going to take? What do we need to do that? You know, how much gas do we have to have in our car to get from somewhere to Chicago? We have to define where we are before we know what resources we need. And so the first step of a planning journey is to start where we are, define where we are. The good news is for financial institutions is that because on a regular basis you're pulling together a response to an auditor or examiner's request for information, you have everything you need to define where you are now. We just need to simplify it and pull out of that what do we need to know from a technology planning perspective. Beyond that, then, we have the top-down ways of collecting information. We have the bottom-up ways of collecting information. But these steps 2 and 3 is really kind of more like, let's brainstorm where we want to go from here. Okay? Where do we want to go from here? And unfortunately, often, banks don't give enough priority to the top-down. It's there anyway. And like I said, I have some, you know, banks where the management team has said, no, we don't want top-down to be part of our technology plan. We just want to focus on bottom-up. But once we're through collecting all the to-dos, what is it that we thought we can do next year? And if we're very thorough on the collection of the to-dos, it's going to make it easier for us to show management that, hey, we only have a certain amount of time, and what we've decided to do so far takes up a lot more than the time we have. And so we've got to whittle it down. We've got to take it back. Okay, we've got to, you know, bring it to a more reasonable level. Then and only then are we ready to say, let's present this to the board. And so, again, if you have a bank business plan, or if you're a credit union, if you have the business plan for your organization, that's where you need to start. That's really the top-down part that we need to start with, or else we're not facilitating the business plan with our technology plan. So for the 25% of you that already have a plan, you've got a good start. You can always start where you are. You can take a look at last year's plan and decide, first of all, what did we get done? What did we not, is still a work in progress, and what did we not even get to? And then hopefully you can also, if you've been treating technology planning as a living and breathing process, where maybe you're monitoring your technology plan in your steering committee meeting, maybe monthly is too often for a smaller bank, but maybe quarterly, you can also have a list of, and here's the, if we had 10 things we thought we were going to do last year, we got 5 of them done, 5 of them are still a work in process, and here's the 20 things that got added since the beginning of the year. And of those 20 things, we got 15 of them done, right? So you have a good starting place. If you do not have a technology plan, I would start pulling together information, from your audit reports, from your asset inventories. If you want to include updating of assets, we got X number of devices that are going to need our operating system updated because we decided we're going to be early majority and not, or I should say late majority and not laggards. Okay, and so now some of you, if you're still updating, trying to get rid of your XP boxes, boy, your technology plan isn't working, right? But then also, what kind of plan changes have we already committed to? And for Infotex, the decider we use there is, what have we already told our customers? Okay, now for banks, and credit unions, it's going to probably be a little bit different. But if you've already put a management response together saying that we'll have the new control implemented by March 31st, well, that's something that we need to make sure is at the top level priority in your technology plan, assuming your management team agrees that meeting management response requirements is a top priority. From there, then, we look at the top-down type. In other words, we don't really have a lot of choice. This is the top telling us this is what we need to do, which starts with analyzing your business plan. And so, if you have a well-written business plan, hopefully it's divided between strategies and tactics, and we really need to learn both the strategies and the tactics, but we're also probably going to be spending a lot of time with Google trying to look up, what we don't understand, trying to get our arms around, what management team members have brought back and already talked management into adding into their business strategy and their business plan. I'll be talking more about strategy and tactics in a few minutes here. What new audit findings, what management response commitments have we made? And then meanwhile, is there any new guidance? What new risks do we face? By the way, this slide right here is at the end of every year, Infotex updates their top 7 risks. We're certainly not done. We reserve the right to change this list. But when you go back and look at the movie or whatever, you might want to write this down and make sure that your risk assessment is covering these 7 risks. But then what new to-dos are coming out of these 7 risks? Are we going to work on better backup systems because we're still freaked out about ransomware? Are Cato still a problem for our bank? That sort of thing. There are to-dos that are going to come out of managing risk. Let's try to pull them into our technology plan. Meanwhile, one of the biggest risks I feel that most ISOs face this year is that they didn't stop, okay? The FFIEC is continuing to update their guidance, which, by the way, I think is a good thing because their guidance hadn't been updated since 2006 for the most part. And so, we have 6 new guidances, if that's the way you say that. I think the plural of guidance is guidance. But we have 6 new documents that have been released since the cybersecurity assessment tool was released on June 30th, 2015. And so, dealing with those, and by the way, what I would do if I was you from a prioritization perspective is maybe deal with these 2 first, because this is the lion's share of what your examiners and auditors are going to be looking at. But have you pulled these documents down, taken a look at them, tried to note what's new, and documented any new to-dos, and any new objectives, any new compliance concerns that have come out of this new guidance. Because if you don't include it in your technology plan, there's not going to be a stop planned out for it on your journey, right? You're going to drive right past that little town because you're busy doing what everybody else wants to have done, and you are now looking bad in your next audit or examination because you didn't realize this new item was a part of the new guidance. Once you're done analyzing the top-down type sources of to-dos, now we have the more flexible stuff, okay? User and customer requests, conference notes. And by the way, customer requests that we said we would respond to, they're really more of the top-down. They're the customer requests that we've already committed to should be in our business plan, I would hope, right? So what we're talking about here is all the ideas that came back from conferences, workshops, webinars, not only from you, not only from the IT and ISOs, IT people and the ISOs, but also from our management team members. They usually might be coming back saying, hey, the financial institution right down the street's doing this and we're not doing it. And it's kind of embarrassing when I talk to my customers about it, whatever, can we get that prioritized in? A lot of management team members are keeping wish lists. Let's request those in advance of pulling together our technology plan. And then, of course, there's a lot of resources we can go to help us decide, where is banking going, where is technology going. Just so you know, every year I write an article at the end of the year called The Magnificent Seven. It's 7 trends impacting small bank information security officers. I primarily work with banks, not credit unions, but it would apply to credit unions as well. It's due to be updated. I think that we do Magnificent 7. Our plan is to have it done before Thanksgiving. And then before Christmas, we will be updating our T7 article. And what this is this just the 7 best trend articles. It'll be in 2017, this next time we do it. So I think this is one we do in January. But if you're on the mailing list for this webinar, you'll get the article announcement when we release these articles. And the purpose of us doing these articles is to help you with your technology plan. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of these. They're completely free. You just click on a link, you go out and you read the article, and it'll give you a list of trends and factors to consider when you're implementing a technology planning process. And then finally, of course, there's the factors that the FFIEC wants Chase to consider. Bank of America, I just don't see, why a community-based bank is going to benefit from analyzing marketplace conditions. I feel like we ought to focus more on what do you want than what's the condition of our marketplace. And I could be maybe oversimplifying the approach that you should take, but the regulatory requirements is definitely something I would focus on because we know the regulators are coming back, right? Organizational growth targets, I think that's important. If the business plan articulates it, then let's consider it. If we're going to double the size of our data, our customer base in 2 years, we ought to know about that in the technology side, right? But there's other factors that the FFIEC wants you to consider as you're going through and defining your technology plan. Once you've collected all of the information, what do you do with it then? And it's not easy. I mean, you're going to end up with 5, 6, maybe 7 pages of notes if you was to just sit down and write it all down by hand. And so how do we go about organizing this into something that we can shop around? And what I found is helpful is to sort the strategy items from the tactics. And so what I mean by that is, what are the high-level objectives we're trying to achieve? And then what tactics do we have to implement in order to hit those high-level objectives? Another way of looking at it is the strategy is really more of our long-term plan, our broad objectives for overall the entire organization, where our tactics are the short-term plans that will help us meet the long-term plans. If our long-term plan is to tie our shoe, the first tactic would probably be to bend over, and the second one would be to grab our shoelaces, et cetera, et cetera. the strategy should talk about and discuss why we're doing what we're doing, how we're going to achieve our mission, what needs to happen in order for us to make this major change to our organization. Whereas the tactics are, who's going to be in charge of it, what are we going to actually do, where is it going to be done, how is it going to be done, what's it going to cost. The tactics achieve the strategy, which achieves the mission. A strategy can be looked at if you start looking at it in terms of your spreadsheet. What you end up doing is you end up categorizing tactics by which strategy they help enforce or which strategy they help us achieve. A strategy could be the line item in the budget, and the tactic is what that line item is comprised of. We're going to update our server, could be the strategy, and the tactic could be we need to buy a server, we need to get the operating systems, we need to get the controls in place, et cetera, et cetera. I hope I'm not beating the dead horse here, but another example is of a strategy would be let's outsource what's not banking, and then the tactics could be let's go to a software as a solution approach to our core. Let's look into outsourcing our email. Let's hire Infotex to monitor our network. Sorry about the little marketing plug there. A strategy could be let's get a handle on these 6 new guidances that came out between June 30th, 2015 and October 18th, 2016. The strategy could be we need to figure out what's in this guidance. The tactics could just be as simple as, well, we're going to focus on the management book, that CAT fact, we better focus on that before our examiners return, and the information security booklet. And when are we going to do it? Well, the examiners are due to come in, if they follow the same schedule. We don't have it scheduled yet, but we're thinking they're going to be coming in September. So this is what we're going to do before August, and this is what we'll do once the examiners come in, because I'd rather hear from them what they think applies to us out of these guidances. So that's the difference between strategy and tactics. Once you have your list sorted, then what you want to do is you want to try to simplify the list. You want to eliminate redundancies. You want to categorize tactics by strategies. You want to try to, in advance, whittle out anything that your management team's going to puke on if you can, right? And then let's make sure we document what you're whittling out, so that way if a management team member says, hey, this plan doesn't include that widget I had asked you about, you can say, well, yeah, we did consider it, but, we knocked it out in our first, prioritization swipe because it just didn't rise to the level. It didn't serve any purpose. It didn't enforce any strategies. Then turn those 2 lists into narratives. We have some templates on the portal. Mike, I'm assuming that you are, we don't have a portal anymore. We're using GoToWebinar now. So I'm assuming that you've already sent these templates or made them available to everybody.
Yes.
But in Infotex fashion, we want to give you some boilerplates that you can use. And so what we have here is we have policy language that you could pull into your high-level policy. Where's that Word document going? Okay, good. Just so you know, we have some language here. Pay attention if you haven't used our boilerplates yet to the transfer of copyright language. But this is where you can get some language that you could use to take your policies to the next level so that you're requiring your management team to do the work that needs to be done in order to have a good, solid IT plan. And then in terms of, we've got like an example here of an IT strategy. And by the way, again, this was for our webinar last year, so obviously we're looking at the wrong years here. But anything in green, by the way, and on this first page, you'll see what our color coding means. But these are just examples. So this is an example IT strategy statement. And then we also have an example tactical plan. Now, obviously, boilerplating an IT plan is kind of difficult because we don't know what you would be planning to do. But at least you can see how we're taking the strategy elements. I don't know if you've noticed that yet, but we've come up with 9 different strategy items, right? And now we're basically spelling out here's the tactics we're going to use to achieve those. Well, in this case, 8 different strategy items. And so there's a method to the madness. There's a set of deliverables that you would end up with. And really, I would also include, before you start shopping this to your management team, what the costs are going to be, and intangible costs for a community-based organization. For a smaller organization, you're not going to be able to analyze the intangible costs. But if you can at least come up with a grading scale, ABC, A meaning that this is going to be very time, intensive. C meaning that, hey, we're just buying an application and installing the controls around it, not a lot of time involved at all. At least then you'll be able to consider the primary source of intangible costs in your technology plan. But then we're not done, and this is where I feel like a lot of people they'll take this to the board, and that's where some of you, if you have an annual plan already and you're at this webinar, maybe it's because you feel like your technology plan isn't working as well as it could, and so maybe what you're missing is the sixth step here, which is once you think you have that plan done, then we start a debriefing process where we figure out who all the stakeholders are. And by the way, some of the stakeholders are not management team members. It could be a teller, it could be a CSA, or a CSR, it could be a branch manager. But who should we take this plan to make sure they understand what our plans are? The decision as to who the stakeholders are is sometimes the success or failure of your technology plan. I mean, you might have a really nice, pretty document, but if you haven't sold it to your management team, it's not going to work. Okay, and then meanwhile, part of what we're selling is what we need to whittle out. And can we get the management team's blessing on the fact that, hey, on February 14th, when you're in a fight with your wife because you didn't do a good job of providing a Valentine's Day present for her, you decided that we want to have this Valentine's Day program that's going to cost, X amount of dollars for us to have this new application. Are you really committed to that, or can we whittle that out? I mean, now that you've had a chance to sleep on it, or whatever. I mean, and I just pulled that example out of thin air, so I hope it didn't offend anybody. But the point is that sometimes we think something's a great idea when we first come up with it, and by the time it's time to do the technology plan, the management team member will say, yeah, take that out of the plan. We don't need to do that. Okay, and so that's why this is such an important part of the process. Saying no is much, much more important than saying yes when it comes to technology planning. What are we not going to get to is what the awareness should be centered around, not as much what we are going to get to. Now, having said that, of course, we want to articulate what we're going to get to once we're done. And so we might have a process in place where we go back to the management team a couple times, and it's real easy to get their enlist their cooperation in reading the deliverables, because all you have to say is, can you help me make sure this is right? I don't want to make you look bad when I present this to the board. Or, whatever works for you. You have the relationship with your management team. Hopefully it's getting better and better as you establish your security culture. But ultimately then, we want to make sure that our board of directors understands why, and we want to make sure our minutes express that you took the technology plan in and you talked to the board about it, that you didn't read it to them, you relied on them reading it, and you just talked to them about why. I would also, I'm a big believer in the more you get in front of the board, the better, the easier your life will be. And so take advantage of your opportunity when you don't have your management, your executive saying, no, you can't go to the board meeting. Ask the board if you can come back maybe 6 months to give them a status on their technology plan. So in summary, and I am running a little bit behind on time, it's probably going to be about 10:05 or so before we finish our webinar here today. But, if we look at technology planning as a design process that's really centered around selecting from a whole bunch of work that we could do and prioritizing that work, and then trying to work on the A priorities before we get to the C priorities, and making our management team aware of the fact that, hey, we can bring this D thing in, but where does it fit? Is it going to go in between the A's and the B's? Is it going to be going between the B's and the C's, or do we have to even do it in the first place? Because now that you remember A and B and C are important, maybe you will agree that we don't have to add that to our plate this year. I'm turning control of our webinar over to you again.
All right, thank you, Dan. Very well done, as always. So in conclusion, if we have no further or no questions, and again, I'd like to thank Dan for your time today. Really appreciate it, as always. And I'd like to thank all
You're
of our
very
attendees.
welcome, Michael.
Everybody have a great day.
All right.
When you view an InfoText webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoText presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoText webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoText reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.